We began reading chapter 25 of Matthew's Gospel. This is the final teaching before the Passion begins. So Matthew is summing up the whole Gospel. We hear three parables in chapter 25 of Matthew's Gospel. Jesus is looking beyond the Passion to his coming in glory. But there's a common thread in all these three stories in Matthew 25. It appears that someone is delayed or absent. Richard Rohr once wrote about having spent some time in Thomas Merton's hermitage in the woods at Gethsemane Monastery in Kentucky because he wanted to catch some of Merton's prayerful spirit. He went out walking one day and he saw a recluse, a monk who lived in complete solitude and silence. Richard saw him at a distance, but he tried to be respectful and not disturb his quiet. But the monk saw him and recognized him. He then surprised Richard by breaking his silence and shouting to him, "Richard, you get to preach and I don't. When you're out there preaching, please tell the people one thing. God is not out there." God bless you. Richard went on to say that someone has said that our search for God is like riding on an elephant looking for an elephant. Or our search for God is like holding a lantern, looking for a light. God is not out there. We are searching for what we already have. At our baptism, we received a candle lighted from the Paschal candle. Receive the light of Christ. And we took our place in the community of people enlightened by faith, that we might walk together always as children of the light. We've already received the light, but sometimes the light needs to be rekindled. As St. Paul said to Timothy, a bishop in the early church, "I remind you to stir into flame the gift of God that is within you. For God did not give us a spirit of cowardice, but a spirit that makes us strong, loving, and wise." Remember the story of the feeding of the 5,000 people in the wilderness? The disciples came to Jesus with a brilliant idea. Hey, this is a deserted place. The hour is getting late. Send the people away so that they may go into the surrounding villages and buy something for themselves to eat. But Jesus answered them, if you remember, "You give them something to eat." And they said to him, "Are we to go and buy 200 denarii worth of bread and give it to them to eat?" It really is laughable. They are with Jesus, who is the bread of life, and they think they need to go out and buy bread. Jesus drinks from the inexhaustible well of the Father's love, and so he's not afraid to pour out his life, because he knows that well will never run dry. It might be helpful to remember that when Israel thought of their relationship to God, they imagined God as the bridegroom, and Israel herself is the bride. So this is about a covenant relationship with God. The kingdom is about relationships. We might better call it the kinship of God. A few weeks ago, we heard the story about a king who gave a wedding banquet for his son. None of the invited guests came, so the king sent his slaves to bring people in off the streets, the good and the bad alike. Obviously, our moral condition is secondary to God's invitation. The banquet is ready, and God wants us to come. So we're called not because we are the best, but because God needs someone to build God's kinship. One of the guests, if you remember, was not wearing a wedding garment that was provided at the door. It seems this man did not imagine himself to be at a wedding banquet. For it turns out that the guests were not invited to witness a wedding. They were invited to be married to the Son. They were not invited to observe, but rather to participate. The requirement is a wedding garment, an eagerness to be united to the Son. In chapter 5 of Matthew's Gospel, in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus declares, "You are the light of the world." But then he goes on to say, a city built on a hill cannot be hid. So Jesus is not talking to you individually, but to you, church. No one, after lighting a lamp, church, puts it under a bushel basket, but on the lampstand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, church, let your light shine before others, so they may see your good works and give glory to your Father in heaven. The parable of the 10 bridesmaids is about 2 groups of maidens rather than just 2 maidens. So this parable then is about the work of the church, of the whole community. The wise community is the one who keeps their lamps trimmed and burning, ready to lift a torch for anyone, the hungry, the poor, the stranger. The foolish ones let their lamps go out, and once they go out, it may not be so easy to rekindle that flame. When they realize that the bridegroom is here, the foolish maidens compound their foolishness by running off to the store in the middle of the night. What they are doing is running away from the maidens who have their lamps lit and away from the bridegroom. They would have been better off to stay with the wise maidens and the bridegroom. Just like the wedding guest who didn't imagine himself at a wedding, the problem with the 5 foolish bridesmaids is that they didn't trust the bridegroom and just joined the party. They ran off to get oil because they thought they weren't good enough to get in without the oil. They didn't realize that the gift of God is not out there. The bridegroom is here, now, at the door, inviting us to come in.